Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at none other than the Samsung Galaxy S3 and see how this specific phone holds up in 2022. Now what I will definitely tell you is that this phone is completely not worth buying anymore. I think pretty much everyone knows that by now. This is a fairly outdated device, really doesn't have too much going for it like I mentioned, but this is a very interesting phone that Samsung made back in 2012 that honestly it sold extremely well. It was regarded as probably one of the best phones probably ever made at that point, and with the capability and the feature set within it, to be honest, when I think of a Samsung phone from back in the day, I think of the Galaxy S3. Easily one of the most popular phones at that time, and what I would definitely tell you is don't buy this phone anymore. But I actually had quite a bit of a history with this phone too, which is very interesting. Now, if you want to buy some phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Galaxy S3, we actually had a 4.8-inch Super AMOLED display on the front. Now, this was a HD panel, so 720p basically. And at this time, looking at this panel now, it's definitely not the best looking panel of all time. It's pretty dated. We have quite a bit of bezel on the top and bottom and on the sides, and it just feels like a pretty cheap phone, to be honest. But back in 2012, I actually owned a Nexus 4, I think around this time, I think 2013, 2014, I owned a Nexus 4, and I'm going to be completely honest, I looked at the Galaxy S3 as having one of the biggest displays and one of the best screens and just the overall best build quality. Like, it was crazy how I looked at this phone. I was fangirling like crazy from this phone. It was insane. Now, personally, I think the Nexus 4 looking back is probably the better phone overall, but there's something about the Galaxy S3 that I just loved, and I was so jealous of every single person that really owned the Galaxy S3 at that time. Now, you had a front camera too, which was really cool. On the bottom, you had a micro USB port and a headphone jack, which was really awesome. And on the back, you had a plastic back that you could actually remove. So you can go ahead and completely remove the back of the plastic, back of the specific Galaxy S3. And that was another really cool advantage of having something like the S3, where you can just go ahead and pop it off, but you also had access to that removable battery, which was a whole nother story. The fact that you can just go ahead, remove the battery from this thing was awesome. I mean, back in 2012, it really wasn't that crazy big of a deal. I mean, this phone came out 10 years ago, but as of right now, having a removable battery, can you imagine that on a flagship phone? And we didn't have a Galaxy S3 Plus or a Galaxy S3 Edge or a Galaxy S3 Ultra. It was just the Galaxy S3. That was the only phone we got. But on top of that, we also had a micro SD card slot on this phone too, which was insane. Having this type of capability was awesome. And personally, I look back at this phone and it was probably one of the most interesting phones that I owned. And just the fact that I just felt so involved with this phone's lineup, I love the S3. And looking back now, I don't really think I have that type of admiration for any phones nowadays, like how I looked at the Galaxy S3 and I was like, man, I want that phone so much, but I just couldn't afford it at the time. Now, I did actually own a Galaxy S3, I think back in 2014, it must have been 2015. And at that time, it was very interesting because I custom ROM'd it as always, and I completely butchered my Galaxy S3. I ruined it. I think I, boot looped it, and I was not able to successfully fix it after that, which is very annoying, but it is what it is. I'll get into that in a second. Now, in terms of the camera setup, we do have, an 8 megapixel camera on the back and a 1.9 megapixel camera on the front. Now, what I'll definitely tell you is this camera is not breaking any records anytime soon. This is a fairly outdated camera compared to phones nowadays. I mean, we can only do 1080p at 30 on the back and only 720p on the front. Like I said, this camera is not breaking records, but the fact that this thing had a camera back then that was still fairly functional is very good. I don't think this was a horrible camera. It's a bad camera now, to be honest, but back in 2012, like I mentioned, I was looking at photos and image samples of the Galaxy S3 back in 2012 or back in 2013 or 2014 when I was having the Nexus 4, and I was just shocked about how good of a camera that phone was. It easily had one of the best cameras of that day and age, and probably even better than the iPhone at that time too. Like, this was the cream of the crop. This was when Galaxies were the best and, Nexus was the worst in terms of camera. And I had a Nexus and I could probably agree with that. And with the Galaxy S3 nowadays, severely outdated, like I mentioned. I mean, this thing is not breaking any records, and it is not necessarily the best performing phone in terms of camera nowadays. But again, back in 2012, I'm sure it was pretty decent, and I think it was probably breaking some records as of that point. So in terms of camera, that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of software, this phone came out with Android Ice Cream Sandwich, which is very interesting because it was probably one of the most monumental versions of Android that has ever came out. It probably goes Ice Cream Sandwich as like one of the most impactful, then Lollipop, and probably not until like Android 9 did we get like another massive update, to be honest. Well, I'll take ice cream sandwich, Kit Kat, lollipop, and then like Android 9. Those things were like really, really massive in my opinion. And I mean, this thing stopped at Android 4.3, so right before Kit Kat. But the thing is, I mean, there were probably some rumors that this thing was getting Kit Kat, and there were probably some models that got Kit Kat too. But to be honest, I custom ROM'd my Galaxy S3 when I had it, and I had a tremendous experience on that when it worked. Like I mentioned, I boot looped it, which was very annoying. I tried hours and hours. I was freaking out because I was like, oh my goodness, I wanted to keep this thing as my main device and I couldn't. And there wasn't really much I could do at that point. I was able to somewhat fix it. I think I was able to, I had to like keep my micro SD card slot in the phone the whole entire time. And if I removed the micro SD card, it would stop working. It was something like that. I hated it. I wish I never did it, but that never stopped me from, custom ROMing again. I custom ROMmed a lot of phones after that. But that kind of covers up the Galaxy S3 in terms of the, custom ROM capability and the software. Now, in terms of performance, this device had that Exynos 4412 quad chipset, quad-core CPU with 1GB of RAM in terms of the RAM variants within it. And what I'll definitely tell you in terms of the RAM variants, it's not a lot of RAM, only 1GB of RAM, not that much, but I think the overall performance, like I mentioned, back in 2012, this thing was a speed demon. This thing was very, very fast. It was probably just as fast as the majority of the other flagships then. I mean, we had the Nexus of that time, we had the iPhones of that time, and that was kind of it. We had the LGs of that time as well, the HTCs, how could I forget? We had a lot of different phones as of that period, but it really wasn't competing super crazy with those phones. I mean, this thing was in its own league. This thing sold very, very well, and rightfully so. I think Samsung did a great job. They marketed this phone very well compared to the other phones back then, and even showed that it was a big upgrade coming from the Galaxy S2. Personally, maybe not everyone else felt like this back in 2012, but personally, I felt like this phone was just the top of the top. This was the flagship among flagships, and really the only thing above this was the Note lineup in my opinion, and I didn't even own a Galaxy. I don't even think I owned a Galaxy as that point. I switched to a Galaxy S4 in 2015 for a little bit, but before that, I mean, I had the LG G2, I had the Nexus 4, and I loved this phone like crazy. I just idolized this phone, and personally, I think I look back nowadays, and the phone's performance back then probably was excellent too, but nowadays, again, it doesn't perform that well, very glitchy, a lot of different like weird sounds that come from one, TouchWiz all the time. But, it is what it is. I probably wouldn't recommend using this phone anymore, but I'm sure back in 2012 it was pretty fast. Now, battery life-wise, 2100 mAh battery inside of it. Not a big size battery compared to nowadays, but like I mentioned, the fact that this thing had a removable battery gave this phone like 3 extra thumbs up from me. I mean, you can go ahead and if you are having battery health problems, get a bigger battery, get another battery. You want a bigger battery, you can go and get it. There were battery cases made for this thing where the battery was so big they had to make a case specifically for this phone. And I'm definitely going to tell you that is one of the things that I missed the most. I could sit here and cry about me wanting another Galaxy phone with like a removable battery. It's probably never going to happen for a flagship, but I love this thing from Samsung. And to be honest, when I look back at the Samsung Galaxy S3, massive thumbs up. I do not recommend buying this phone anymore. It is not worth buying anymore. But the fact that Samsung made a phone that I can just remember back and thinking like, man, I wanted that phone so badly, it speaks mountains. And, I attribute the Galaxy S3 a lot to my, jealousy of a lot of phones back then. Again, when I owned the Nexus 4, I was so jealous of this phone. And that's probably, still today, probably in some phones too. So that kind of covers it. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.